Officer Danny Rodriguez had been working the afternoon shift for 3 years, but Tuesday calls always seemed to bring something unexpected. He was finishing his coffee when the radio crackled to life with a familiar voice from dispatch. Unit 47, we have a possible burglary in progress at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive. Neighbor reports suspicious activity and believes the house may have been broken into. Danny set down his cup and grabbed his keys. Oak Ridge Drive was in the nicer part of town, where the houses sat far back from the road behind perfectly trimmed hedges. These weren't the kind of neighborhoods where he usually got called for break-ins, but crime didn't care about zip codes. The drive took him through winding streets lined with oak trees that gave the area its name. Large homes sat on spacious lots, each one looking like it belonged in a magazine. Danny had grown up on the other side of town where houses were close together and yards were small. He always felt a little out of place in neighborhoods like this, but a job was a job. He pulled up to 1247 and immediately noticed what the caller was talking about. The house was beautiful, with a brick front and large windows, but something felt off. Newspapers were scattered on the front porch, yellowed from several days in the sun. The mailbox was overflowing, and what looked like packages were stacked by the front door. Danny parked his patrol car and walked up the driveway, taking note of everything around him. The grass was getting long, unusual for a neighborhood where most people took pride in their lawns. He knocked on the front door and waited, listening for any sounds from inside. Nothing. Walking around to the side of the house, he noticed the gate to the backyard was slightly open. That struck him as odd. Most people in neighborhoods like this kept their gates locked tight. He pushed it open carefully and made his way to the back of the house. The backyard was impressive, with a large deck and what looked like an expensive outdoor kitchen. But what caught his attention was the back door. It was standing wide open, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. Danny felt his heart rate pick up a little. An open back door could mean several things, and most of them weren't good. He called it in on his radio, letting dispatch know he had found signs of a possible break-in and was going to investigate further. Unit 47 to dispatch, I have an unsecured residence with an open back door. I'm going to do a protective sweep to make sure no one is inside who shouldn't be there. Copy that, Unit 47. Backup is en route. Danny approached the open door carefully, calling out as he got closer. Police department. Is anyone home? His voice echoed through the house, but no one answered. He stepped inside and immediately noticed how quiet everything was. The house had that empty feeling that comes when no one has been around for a while. The air was still, and there was a slight musty smell that happens when windows haven't been opened in days. The back door led into a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a cooking show. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a large island in the middle. Everything was clean and organized, but there were signs that someone had left in a hurry. A coffee cup sat on the counter with a small amount of liquid still in the bottom, now covered with a thin film. A newspaper was folded open to a page about military news. Danny made his way through the rest of the first floor, checking each room methodically. The living room had comfortable furniture arranged around a large fireplace. Family photos lined the mantel, showing what appeared to be military ceremonies and formal events. He noticed several pictures of a man in uniform receiving awards and shaking hands with important-looking people. The dining room table had mail scattered across it, as if someone had been going through it before being interrupted. Danny didn't touch anything but could see bills and what looked like official correspondence mixed in with the usual junk mail. As he continued his sweep, Danny started to get a clearer picture of who lived here. This wasn't just any house. The furniture was expensive. The artwork on the walls looked original, and everything had a sense of order and discipline that reminded him of military homes he had visited before. He made his way upstairs, calling out again to make sure no one was hiding somewhere in the house. The staircase was lined with more photographs, these showing the same man in uniform in various locations around the world. Desert scenes, formal ceremonies, group photos with other military personnel. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway, and like the rest of the house, it was neat and organized. The bed was made with military precision, corners tucked so tight you could bounce a quarter off the blanket. Danny had seen that kind of bed making before. His father had been in the army and insisted on the same standard at home. But as he looked around the room, something else caught his attention. The carpet in front of the large dresser looked disturbed, as if something heavy had been moved recently. There were indentations in the carpet and what appeared to be scratch marks on the hardwood floor underneath. Danny knelt down to get a better look without touching anything. The scratches were fresh and there were small metal shavings scattered around. It looked like someone had used tools here recently and not carefully. Standing up, he noticed that one of the pictures on the wall was hanging slightly crooked. It was a large painting of a mountain landscape, the kind of expensive artwork that people use to decorate formal rooms. But when Danny looked closer, he could see that it wasn't hanging quite right. His training kicked in. Pictures hung crooked often meant someone had moved them to access something behind them. Wall safes were common in expensive homes, especially in neighborhoods where people had valuable items worth protecting. Danny stepped back and studied the room again, this time looking for other signs that someone had been searching for something. The dresser drawers were all closed, but one was pushed in slightly less than the others. The closet door was open just a crack, even though the rest of the house showed signs of someone who kept everything perfectly organized. He was starting to piece together what might have happened here. Someone had broken into the house, probably through that unlocked back door, and had been looking for something specific. The disturbed carpet, the crooked painting, the fresh tool marks on the floor, it all pointed to someone trying to get into a wall safe. Danny called dispatch, again to request a detective and to let them know he might have a more serious crime scene than originally thought. As he waited for backup to arrive, he continued his investigation, being careful not to disturb any potential evidence. The house told a story of someone who lived alone, but had an important job. Someone who traveled frequently and took security seriously. The military photos suggested this wasn't just any homeowner, but someone with significant responsibilities and possibly access to sensitive information. Danny had handled plenty of burglaries before, but something about this one felt different. The level of sophistication suggested this wasn't a random break-in by someone looking for quick cash or easy-to-sell electronics. This felt planned, targeted, and professional. As he waited for the detective to arrive, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing in the middle of something much bigger than a typical residential burglary. Detective Lisa Chang arrived at the Oak Ridge Drive house just as the sun was beginning to set. She had been a detective for 8 years, and something about this case already felt unusual. Officer Rodriguez had briefed her over the phone, but she wanted to see the scene for herself. Danny met her at the front door, his notebook in hand. "The house definitely feels like someone left in a hurry," he explained as they walked inside. But whoever broke in wasn't looking for the usual stuff. They went straight upstairs to the master bedroom. Lisa nodded, pulling on latex gloves as they made their way through the house. She had developed a habit of taking her time at crime scenes, looking for details that others might miss. The kitchen caught her attention first. Everything was expensive and well-maintained, but there were subtle signs of disruption. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a slight gap between the refrigerator and the wall. "Someone moved this recently. You can see the scuff marks on the floor." They continued upstairs to the master bedroom, where Lisa immediately noticed what Danny had described. The painting was definitely crooked, and the carpet showed clear signs that something had happened here. "Help me with this painting," Lisa said, moving toward the wall. "But don't touch the frame directly. Use a towel or something to avoid smudging any fingerprints." Danny found a clean towel from the master bathroom, and together they carefully lifted the heavy painting away from the wall. Behind it, exactly as Lisa had suspected, was a wall safe. But this wasn't just any wall safe. It was a high-end model, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. "Well, that explains the tool marks on the floor," Lisa said, kneeling down to examine the safe more closely. The door was still locked, but there were clear signs that someone had tried to get into it. Fresh scratches surrounded the lock mechanism, and small metal shavings were scattered on the carpet below. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," Danny observed. "These aren't random scratches. Someone used professional tools and had a good idea of how to get into a safe like this." Lisa stood up and looked around the room again, but they didn't succeed. "The safe is still locked, which means they either got interrupted or didn't have the right equipment to finish the job." She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of everything. The scratches on the safe, the tool marks on the floor, the way the painting had been hanging. Every detail could be important later. "Do we know who lives here?" Lisa asked. Danny flipped through his notes. "The house is registered to someone named Robert Washington. but I haven't been able to reach him yet. Based on all the military photos around the house, I'm guessing he's active duty or retired military. Lisa continued examining the safe while Danny called dispatch to run a more detailed check on the homeowner. The safe was impressive, with what looked like both a combination lock and a digital keypad. It was the kind of security system that suggested whatever was inside was very important. "This is interesting," Lisa said, pointing to a small sticker on the safe door. "This is a government-approved security rating. You don't see these in regular homes. Whatever Mr. Washington does for work, he has access to some serious stuff." Danny hung up his phone with a confused look on his face. "Dispatch is having trouble finding information on Robert Washington. His record is mostly classified, but they did confirm he's active military. High-ranking, but they can't tell me more than that over the radio." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. A high-ranking military officer with a government-rated safe in his home, and someone had tried to break into it. This wasn't just a burglary anymore. This could be a national security issue. "We need to get this safe open," she said. "If someone was trying to steal classified information, we need to know what they were after and whether they got it." Danny looked uncertain. "Are we allowed to do that? I mean, if it's government stuff." "It's evidence in a crime," Lisa replied, "and right now we don't know if anything was taken. The only way to find out is to see what's supposed to be in there." Lisa called her supervisor to explain the situation. After a brief conversation, she got approval to open the safe, with the understanding that if it contained classified material, they would immediately contact federal authorities. "We're going to need special equipment," Lisa said. "This isn't the kind of safe you open with a crowbar. I know a guy who does this kind of work for the department." An hour later, Tom Bradley arrived with a truck full of specialized tools. Tom had been opening safes for law enforcement for over 15 years, and he took pride in being able to get into almost anything without causing damage. "This is a nice one," Tom said, examining the safe. "Military grade, probably cost $15,000 or more. But somebody already did half the work for us." He pointed to the scratches around the lock mechanism. "They were using the right tools, just didn't have enough time to finish the job." Tom set up his equipment methodically, explaining each step to Lisa and Danny. "The key is to be patient. These safes are designed to resist exactly what we're doing, so you can't rush it." As Tom worked, Lisa continued examining the rest of the room. She found more evidence that the intruder had been thorough. Dresser drawers had been searched carefully, with items moved but then placed back in approximately the right positions. The closet had been gone through, but again, whoever did it had tried to make it look undisturbed. "This person was a professional," Lisa told Danny. "Look how carefully everything was searched. Most burglars tear a place apart. This person was trying not to leave obvious signs that they were here." Danny was studying the family photos on the dresser. "These pictures are incredible. This guy has met presidents, foreign leaders, generals with more stars than I can count. Whatever he does, he's important." Tom had been working quietly for over an hour when he finally looked up with satisfaction. "I think I've got it. Everyone stand back just in case there's some kind of security system I don't know about." Lisa and Danny moved to the other side of the room as Tom carefully turned the final mechanism. They heard a soft click and the heavy door of the safe swung open slightly. "That's it," Tom said, stepping back. "She's all yours." Lisa approached the safe carefully, using her flashlight to peer inside before reaching for anything. What she saw made her heart race. The safe was full of documents, but not the kind of documents you'd expect to find in someone's home. File folders with official seals, documents marked with various classification levels, and what appeared to be military communications equipment. There were also personal items, jewelry, cash, and some family documents, but the official materials dominated the space. "We're way over our heads here," Lisa said quietly. "This isn't just military stuff. Some of these documents have classifications I've never even seen before." Danny peered over her shoulder and whistled softly. "No wonder someone wanted to get into this safe. The question is, did they get what they came for before we showed up?" Lisa started photographing everything in the safe without touching any of it. "We need to contact federal authorities immediately, and we need to find Robert Washington as soon as possible. If someone was after this information, he could be in danger." As she worked, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple burglary. The professional nature of the break-in attempt, the high-level security measures in the house, and now the contents of the safe all pointed to something that went far beyond local law enforcement. "Tom," she said, "I need you to close this back up exactly the way it was, but don't lock it. We're going to need federal investigators to examine everything properly." Tom nodded and began carefully securing the safe. "In 30 years of this work, I've never seen anything quite like this setup. Whoever lives here, they're definitely not your average homeowner." Lisa was already on the phone with her captain, explaining the situation and requesting immediate contact with federal authorities. As the gravity of what they had discovered began to sink in, she realized that this case was about to become much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The break-in attempt wasn't just about money or valuables. Someone had been after information that could affect national security, and now it was up to them to figure out who and why. The next morning brought a team of federal investigators to the Oak Ridge Drive house. Lisa Chang had spent most of the night on the phone with various agencies, explaining the situation and coordinating the response. By 8 a.m., the quiet residential street looked like a government convention, with unmarked cars and officials in suits. Special Agent Kevin Torres introduced himself to Lisa and Danny. He was a calm man in his 40s who had been investigating cases involving military personnel for over a decade. "We appreciate you calling us in immediately," he said. "Cases like this can get complicated quickly if they're not handled properly from the start." Agent Torres brought with him a team that included a safe specialist, a documents expert, and a security technician. They had equipment that made Tom's tools look like toys from a hardware store. "Before we proceed," Agent Torres explained to Lisa and Danny, "I need to make something clear. Everything you've seen here is now part of a federal investigation. The homeowner, General Robert Washington, is currently overseas on a classified assignment. We've been in contact with his command and he's being briefed on the situation." Danny felt his stomach drop. "General? As in a real general?" "One of the highest-ranking officers in the U.S. Army," Agent Torres confirmed. "Which is why someone trying to break into his personal safe is a very serious matter. We need to determine exactly what the intruder was after and whether they got it." The federal team had been working for 2 hours when Agent Torres made a discovery that changed everything. While examining the safe more closely, he found something that Tom's quick inspection had missed. "There's a secondary security system here," he announced, pointing to a small device attached to the inside of the safe door. "It looks like some kind of paint dispersal system, probably activated when the safe is opened incorrectly or without proper authorization." Lisa looked confused. "But we opened it yesterday without any problems." Agent Torres studied the device more carefully. "That's because it wasn't armed yesterday. But someone has armed it since then. Look here." He pointed to a small LED light that was blinking red. "This wasn't active when you first opened it." The realization hit everyone at the same time. Someone had been in the house after they left yesterday. While they thought they had secured the crime scene, the intruder had returned to finish what they started. "We need to process this safe again," Agent Torres said, "but we have to assume this paint system is now active. My specialist can disarm it, but it's going to take some time." However, time was something they didn't have. Agent Torres received a phone call that made him change his approach entirely. General Washington was being recalled from his overseas assignment immediately, and he would be arriving home within hours. If there was classified information missing from his safe, they needed to know right away. "We can't wait," Agent Torres decided. "We need to know what's in that safe now, paint trap or not. But we're going to do this as safely as possible." The team set up protective equipment around the safe. Plastic sheeting covered the floor and walls, and everyone put on protective gear. Agent Torres had dealt with security paint systems before, and he knew they could be messy, but weren't dangerous. "The paint is designed to mark anyone who tries to break into the safe," he explained. "It's bright, it's permanent, and it gets everywhere. But it won't hurt anyone. The idea is that if someone steals documents, they'll be covered in paint that's impossible to wash off quickly." Danny volunteered to be the one to open the safe. "I was the first officer on the scene," he said. "If something goes wrong, it should be on me." But Agent Torres shook his head. "This is a federal matter now. My specialist will handle it." Agent Rebecca Martinez stepped forward. She had been quiet most of the morning, but she was the team's expert on security systems. She had disarmed dozens of paint traps before, but never one that had been modified by someone other than the original installer. "The problem is, we don't know how this system was modified," she explained. "The intruder could have changed the activation trigger, the amount of paint, or even the type of paint being used. We need to be prepared for anything. Martinez set up her equipment carefully, using a small camera to examine the inside of the paint system without triggering it. What she saw made her frown. "This has definitely been modified," she announced. "The original system probably had a small amount of paint designed to mark someone's hands and arms. But someone has connected additional canisters. There's probably 3 times as much paint in here as there should be." Agent Torres considered their options. They could wait for more specialized equipment, but that could take days. They could try to contact the original installer of the system, but that would also take time they didn't have. Or they could proceed carefully and accept that someone was going to get very messy. "I'll do it," Martinez said finally, "but everyone else needs to be outside the room when I trigger this thing." Lisa and Danny watched from the hallway as Martinez prepared to open the safe. She had covered herself completely in protective gear, including a full face mask and gloves that went up to her elbows. "Here we go," Martinez called out, reaching for the safe door handle. The moment she pulled the door open, the room erupted in bright purple paint. But instead of the controlled spray they had expected, paint came shooting out of the safe like a fire hose. Martinez was hit immediately, the force of the paint spray knocking her backward. "Martinez!" Agent Torres shouted, rushing into the room despite the continuing spray of paint. The modified system had been designed to empty all of its canisters at once, creating a massive purple explosion that covered everything in the room. Martinez was completely purple from head to toe, the paint so thick that it was dripping off her protective gear. But the worst part was that the paint had gotten under her face mask. She was stumbling around the room trying to wipe purple paint from her eyes while more continued to spray from the safe. "I can't see," Martinez shouted. "It's in my eyes." Agent Torres grabbed her and pulled her toward the bathroom while Danny ran to find towels. The paint was still spraying from the safe, covering the walls, the ceiling, and everything else in the room with thick purple coating. "Call an ambulance," Torres shouted to Lisa. "We need to get her eyes flushed immediately." Lisa was already on the phone with emergency services while trying to avoid the paint that was now spreading into the hallway. The stuff was everywhere, and it showed no signs of stopping. Danny returned with towels and helped Torres guide Martinez to the master bathroom, where they began flushing her eyes with clean water. The paint was thick and sticky, and it wasn't coming off easily. "This isn't regular security paint," Torres realized. "This is some kind of industrial coating. It's not supposed to be this thick or this hard to remove." The ambulance arrived within minutes, and paramedics immediately began treating Martinez for paint exposure. Her eyes were red and irritated, but she could see well enough to know she looked ridiculous. "I'm okay," she insisted, though her voice was muffled by the thick paint covering her face. "But I look like a purple monster." While Martinez was being treated, the paint system finally stopped spraying. The safe was now empty of paint, but the entire room looked like a purple bomb had exploded. Paint covered every surface, and it was so thick that it was still dripping from the ceiling. "Well," Agent Torres said, looking at the disaster zone that used to be a bedroom, "at least we know the safe is definitely open now." Despite everything that had happened, they still needed to examine the contents of the safe. Torres carefully made his way through the purple mess to look inside, using a flashlight to see through the paint coating that now covered everything. "The documents are still here," he announced. "Covered in paint, but still here, and it looks like everything is accounted for." Lisa felt a mix of relief and confusion. So nothing was stolen? Then what was the intruder after? Torres was thinking the same thing. If the goal had been to steal classified documents, why set up such an elaborate paint trap? And why come back to arm the system after the police had already discovered the break-in attempt? "I think," Torres said slowly, "that we've been looking at this all wrong. What if the intruder wasn't trying to steal anything? What if they were trying to make sure we couldn't access what was in here?" The implications of that theory were troubling. If someone wanted to prevent authorities from examining the contents of General Washington's safe, it suggested they knew something about what was inside that they didn't want discovered. As Martinez was taken to the hospital for further treatment, still completely purple from head to toe, Torres began the careful process of examining the paint-covered documents in the safe. Each one would need to be cleaned and preserved, a process that could take weeks. But one thing was clear. What had started as a simple burglary call had become something much more complex and potentially dangerous. And somewhere out there, The person responsible for all of this was probably watching the news coverage and planning their next move. 3 hours after the paint incident, while Agent Martinez was still at the hospital getting purple dye removed from places she didn't know paint could reach, Agent Torres received a phone call that changed everything about the case. General Washington has landed, his supervisor informed him. He's being briefed at the base, but he's not happy. And Agent Torres, there's something else you need to know about the general before he arrives. Danny Rodriguez was helping clean up the purple disaster in the bedroom when he overheard Torres taking the call. The federal agent's expression changed from concern to something close to panic. What do you mean, something else? Torres asked into his phone. Lisa Chang, who was documenting the scene with her camera, noticed Torres had gone very quiet. In her experience, when federal agents went quiet during phone calls, it usually meant bad news for everyone else involved. Sir, Torres said carefully. Could you repeat that? I want to make sure I understand correctly. Danny stopped cleaning paint from a picture frame and looked at Torres. The agent's face had gone pale, which was impressive considering everything they'd been through already. Torres ended his call and stood in the purple-coated room, looking like he was trying to figure out how to deliver bad news. Lisa and Danny waited, both sensing that whatever they were about to learn would make their day even more complicated. General Robert Washington, Torres began slowly, is not just any general. He's the first African American to hold his specific position in the Army's command structure. He's been in the news recently for his work on military integration policies and has been very vocal about equality in the armed forces. Danny felt his stomach drop. Oh no. Oh yes, Torres continued. And here's the part that's going to make this really interesting. The general has been dealing with threats recently. Someone has been sending him letters, making phone calls, targeting him because of his position and his race. The FBI has been investigating, but they haven't found who's behind it. Lisa lowered her camera. So you're telling us that a high-ranking African-American general who's been receiving threats had his house broken into and his safe tampered with, and we're the ones who ended up opening it and getting covered in paint? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Torres replied. And it gets better. The media has already picked up the story. Someone called the local news stations about federal agents being at the general's house, and now there are news vans parked outside. Danny looked around the paint-covered room and tried to imagine how this was going to look on the evening news. A white police officer and federal agents breaking into a black general's safe and getting covered in paint. Even with the best intentions, it was going to be a public relations nightmare. There's more, Torres added. The general's lawyer is on the way, along with representatives from several civil rights organizations. Everyone wants to know why law enforcement was in the general's house and why we opened his personal safe. Lisa sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to avoid the wet paint. Please tell me we have body camera footage of everything we did. Danny checked his camera. I've got most of it recorded, starting from when I first arrived at the house. But Torres, your team wasn't wearing cameras during the safe opening. Torres ran his hand through his hair, probably getting some purple paint in it. This is going to be a mess. A decorated black general comes home to find that police broke into his house and went through his personal belongings. No matter how legitimate our reasons were, it's going to look terrible. The sound of cars pulling up outside made them all look toward the window. Through the purple paint splattered on the glass, they could see news vans setting up equipment on the street. I need to call my captain, Lisa said, pulling out her phone. He needs to know what's coming before he sees it on TV. While Lisa made her call, Torres received another phone call, this one making his expression even more grim. When he hung up, he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. General Washington is 10 minutes away, he announced. His lawyer, a representative from the NACP, and a congressman are with him. Oh, and the Army's Inspector General wants a full report on our actions here. Danny sat down next to Lisa on the paint-covered bed. So let me make sure I understand this. We responded to a legitimate burglary call, followed proper procedures, discovered what appeared to be a break-in attempt on a safe, got federal authorities involved and tried to determine what the intruder was after. But because the homeowner happens to be a prominent black general who's been receiving threats, this is going to look like we were targeting him. That's about right, Torres confirmed. And the paint incident is going to make it look even worse. The pictures of Agent Martinez covered head to toe in purple paint are probably going to be on every news channel in the country. Lisa finished her call with her captain and looked around the room. My captain says the mayor's office is already getting calls. Everyone wants to know why police were in General Washington's house without his permission. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on any of them. They had been trying to help by investigating what appeared to be a crime against General Washington's property. But now it looked like they were the ones who had violated his privacy and security. What about the actual intruder? Danny asked. Are we just going to forget that someone actually did break into this house and try to get into the safe? Torres nodded. That's the part that's getting lost in all of this. There was a real crime here, committed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, but now everyone's focused on our response instead of the original break-in. The sound of more cars arriving outside made them look toward the window again. This time they could see official-looking vehicles with government plates pulling up behind the news vans. That's probably the general, Torres said, checking his phone for the time. I guess it's time to face the music. Lisa stood up and looked at her purple-stained uniform. This is definitely not how I imagined explaining my actions to a general and his lawyer. Danny was thinking about something else entirely. You know what bothers me about all of this? We still don't know who actually broke into the house or why they set up that paint trap. Everyone's so focused on what we did wrong that they're forgetting someone committed a real crime here. Torres was already heading downstairs to meet General Washington. One problem at a time, Rodriguez. First, we have to explain why we're covered in paint in this man's bedroom. Then we can worry about catching the actual criminal. As they made their way downstairs, Lisa couldn't help but think about how quickly things had gone wrong. They had followed procedure, called for backup, involved the proper authorities, and tried to do everything by the book. But sometimes doing the right thing still led to the wrong outcome. The front door opened and they could hear voices in the entryway. General Washington had arrived, and from the tone of the conversation, he was not happy about what he found. I want to see exactly what was done to my home, they heard an authoritative voice say, and I want explanations for every action taken by law enforcement in my absence. Torres appeared at the bottom of the stairs, gesturing for Lisa and Danny to come down. General Washington, these are the officers who initially responded to the call about your house. Danny took a deep breath and started down the stairs, knowing that the next few hours were going to be some of the most difficult of his career. Behind him, Lisa was probably thinking the same thing. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs and saw General Washington for the first time, Danny realized that this conversation was going to be even more challenging than he had imagined. The general was an imposing figure in full-dress uniform, and his expression made it clear that he expected answers to some very difficult questions. General Robert Washington stood in his living room, still wearing his dress uniform from the emergency flight home, looking at the purple footprints that led from his front door to his bedroom. His expression was unreadable, but Danny Rodriguez could feel the tension in the room like a physical weight. The general was not what Danny had expected. He was shorter than the commanding figure in all the photographs, maybe 5'9", but he carried himself with the kind of presence that made him seem much larger. His hair was silver, and he had the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in difficult places doing difficult things. Officer Rodriguez, the general said, his voice calm but firm. I understand you were the first to respond to the call about my house. Yes, sir, Danny replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He had never spoken to a general before, and the formal atmosphere was making him nervous. And Detective Chang, the general continued, turning to Lisa, you were the investigator who made the decision to open my safe. That's correct, sir, Lisa answered. We believed it was necessary to determine if anything had been stolen during the break-in attempt. General Washington nodded slowly, then looked at Agent Torres. And you, Agent Torres, supervised the federal investigation that resulted in my bedroom being painted purple. General, I want to start by apologizing for, Torres began, but the general raised his hand. I don't want apologies right now, General Washington said. I want to understand exactly what happened in my home while I was serving my country overseas. For the next 2 hours, Danny, Lisa, and Agent Torres walked General Washington through every step of their investigation. They showed him the open back door where the intruder had entered, the disturbed carpet in his bedroom, the scratch marks around his safe, and finally, the purple disaster that had once been his master bedroom. General Washington listened without interrupting, asking occasional questions about procedure and timing. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Stone, took notes and occasionally asked for clarification about legal authorities and warrant requirements. So let me make sure I understand this, General Washington said when they finished their explanation. My neighbor called police about suspicious activity at my house. Officer Rodriguez responded and found evidence of a break-in. Detective Chang followed proper procedure to investigate. And when federal authorities became involved, they made the decision to examine my safe to determine if classified material had been compromised. That's correct, sir, Danny said. The general walked over to one of the windows and looked out at the news van still parked on his street. And now the media is reporting that police broke into a black general's house and rifled through his personal belongings. Patricia Stone leaned forward. General, we could file complaints against the police department and the federal agencies involved. The optics of this situation are very damaging to your reputation and could affect your career. General Washington was quiet for several minutes, and Danny found himself holding his breath. The room was so silent that he could hear the clock ticking on the mantel and the sound of reporters talking outside. Finally, the general turned back to face them. Mrs. Stone, I appreciate your concern, but I have a different perspective on this situation. He walked over to Danny first. Officer Rodriguez, you responded to a legitimate complaint from my neighbor, discovered evidence of a crime, and followed your training to secure the scene and investigate. Is that accurate? Yes, sir, Danny replied, surprised by the general's tone. Detective Chang, the general continued, when you discovered that my safe had been tampered with, you called for federal assistance because you recognized that this could involve classified material. You didn't try to handle it yourself or ignore the potential national security implications. Lisa nodded. We felt it was the right thing to do, sir. And Agent Torres, the general said, turning to the federal agent. Your team treated this as a serious security matter and acted to protect potentially classified information, even when it became personally difficult and embarrassing. Torres looked confused. General, I'm not sure I understand where you're going with this. General Washington smiled for the first time since arriving home. What I'm saying is that every one of you did exactly what you should have done. You responded to a crime, you followed proper procedures, you involved the appropriate authorities, and you worked to protect national security. The fact that it turned into a paint-covered disaster doesn't change the fact that you were doing your jobs correctly. Patricia Stone looked stunned. General, the media coverage is going to be terrible. This story is going to be everywhere. Then we'll make sure they tell the right story, General Washington replied. The story of law enforcement officers who responded professionally to a crime, regardless of the race or status of the homeowner. The story of people doing their jobs correctly even when it got messy. Danny felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he was still confused about one thing. Sir, what about the person who actually broke into your house? Do we know who that was or why they did it? General Washington's expression became more serious. Agent Torres, have you had a chance to examine the contents of my safe? We're still processing everything, Torres replied. The paint made it difficult, but we should have preliminary results soon. When you do, the general said, I think you'll find that nothing was taken. But I believe you will find evidence of something that was left behind. Torres looked puzzled. Left behind? General Washington nodded. Someone wanted you to find that safe and open it. The break-in was designed to look like an attempted burglary, but it was actually bait. Someone wanted law enforcement to discover the safe and examine its contents. Lisa sat forward in her chair. But why? What would they gain from that? Information, the general replied. By monitoring how law enforcement responded, what procedures were followed, and how long it took federal authorities to get involved. Someone was gathering intelligence about security procedures around high-ranking military personnel. The implications of what the general was suggesting began to sink in. Danny realized they had been manipulated from the beginning. The break-in, the paint trap, even the media attention. It had all been planned. The paint trap wasn't meant to stop us, Agent Torres said, understanding dawning in his voice. It was meant to create a spectacle, to make sure this incident got maximum attention. Exactly, General Washington confirmed. Someone wanted to embarrass law enforcement, create racial tensions, and gather information about security procedures all at the same time. It was quite sophisticated, actually. Patricia Stone looked impressed despite herself. So what do we do now? General Washington walked over to his mantel and picked up one of the family photos, wiping a small spot of purple paint off the frame. Now we work together to catch whoever did this, and we make sure the media understands what really happened here. Over the next few hours, General Washington worked with Danny, Lisa, and Agent Torres to piece together a timeline of the real crime. The break-in had been carefully planned to look amateur but was actually quite professional. The intruder had planted a small recording device in the safe, which had transmitted everything that happened during the investigation. They heard every word we said, Torres realized. They know our procedures, our response times, and our decision-making process. Which means, General Washington added, they're probably planning to use that information against other targets. The investigation that followed lasted 3 months and involved multiple agencies. The breakthrough came when they traced the electronic components in the recording device to a domestic terrorist group that had been targeting minority military leaders. Danny Rodriguez received a commendation for his professional response to the initial call. Lisa Chang was promoted to sergeant and eventually became the department's liaison with federal agencies. Agent Torres was assigned to a task force dedicated to protecting high-ranking military personnel from domestic threats. But perhaps most importantly, General Washington became a regular speaker at police academies and federal training centers, telling the story of how law enforcement professionals had done their jobs correctly under difficult circumstances, regardless of his race or their backgrounds. The purple paint eventually came out of most surfaces, though Agent Martinez claimed for years that she could still find traces of it in her hair during certain lighting conditions. She became something of a legend in federal law enforcement circles, known as the agent who took a paint bomb to protect classified information. The story that could have divided communities instead became an example of how people from different backgrounds could work together professionally, even when things got messy. And Danny Rodriguez learned that sometimes doing the right thing leads to unexpected outcomes. But that doesn't make it any less right. 6 months later, when General Washington received another promotion, Danny Rodriguez was among the officers providing security for the ceremony. As the general walked past, he stopped and shook Danny's hand. "Thank you for answering that call, Officer Rodriguez," he said quietly, "and for doing your job the right way." Danny smiled. "Just doing my job, sir." "That's exactly what made the difference," General Washington replied, and continued on to receive his new stars. The case became a teaching example in law enforcement training programs across the country, proof that professionalism and proper procedures could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. And while the bedroom at 1247 Oak Ridge Drive was eventually repainted, General Washington kept one small purple handprint on the wall behind his dresser, as a reminder that sometimes the messiest situations lead to the most important lessons.